Sienna Drake had her face buried in the guts of a wormhole stabilizer, where the air smelled like burnt metal and panic. An alarm was blaring in the distance, a honking reminder that something, somewhere, was probably on fire. Again, she'd always dreamed of working at the wormhole crossroad, where humanity met the cosmos. Less a crossroads now, more like a congested intersection with a broken traffic light. "You still alive in there, Drake?" came a voice crackling through the comms. It was her supervisor, Jax Veltro, who sounded like he'd been gargling with nails. "If you call this living, sure," Sienna muttered, twisting another bolt into place. "Got some smoke coming out ta your end," Jax noted, with the casual indifference of someone who's watched the world burn one too many times. "Gonna do something about it?" Sienna gave a sarcastic grin that nobody saw. "Smoke's my favorite shade of gray." She yanked her tool from the stabilizer, the device humming back to life with a disgruntled whir. Another crisis averted, at least until the next one decided to drop by. In the break room, which doubled as a storage closet for broken dreams, Sienna plopped into a chair that groaned in protest. She rubbed her eyes, which felt as tired as a politician's promises. The walls were adorned with motivational posters that read more like cruel jokes in this place. "You can do it," one declared, next to a photo of a cat hanging off a branch. The cat looked about as enthusiastic as Sienna felt. She opened her holo tab, scrolling through the day's anomalies. There was the usual crap: stray signals, minor disturbances, cosmic static, except for one entry that blinked at her like a neon sign in a blackout. "Anomaly detected, unidentified data stream." "Well, that's new," she mumbled, curiosity prodding her like a persistent itch. Sienna tapped into the data, her eyes narrowing as she skimmed through the numbers. It was unlike anything she'd seen, a dance of code that whispered secrets from the universe's darker corners. She felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: excitement. And maybe, just maybe, hope. "You look way too happy for this dump," said a voice over her shoulder. It was Kai, her fellow engineer, with a grin that could curdle milk. "What's got you lit up like a supernova? Take a look," Sienna said, spinning the screen around. Kai leaned in, his eyebrows shooting up as he scanned the data. "Holy shit, that's something big," Sienna replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Bigger than Jax's ego," Kai quipped, and they both snorted. That was a high bar. "Think it could be a game changer?" he asked, more serious now. "If this data can be decoded, it might just be," Sienna said, her mind racing with possibilities. The wormhole crossroad wasn't just a hub of technology and trade. It could be the birthplace of something revolutionary, something that could tip the scales of power. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Kai said, though his eyes were gleaming with the same thrill. "Remember last time we thought we found something big? Turned out to be space junk." "Yeah, well, this ain't no busted satellite," Sienna replied, smirking. She felt that old fire rekindling, the one that had been doused by years of corporate bullshit and bureaucratic inertia. But this anomaly, this bizarre puzzle, it was a spark in the darkness. "You gonna tell Jax?" Kai asked, smirk fading into something more serious. "Not yet. Last thing I need is him breathing down my neck," Sienna said. "Besides, if this is what I think it is, we'll need more than just his approval." "Like who?" "The Queen of Mars," Kai chuckled. "Or maybe someone who actually gives a damn about more than their next paycheck." Sienna shot back, her tone sharper than a spiked drink. The alarm blared again, because of course it did. "Another day, another disaster," Sienna sighed, pushing herself up and heading back to the chaos. "You sure you're not gonna run away to join the circus?" Kai called after her, only half joking. "This place is the circus," she yelled back. "I'm just the clown." With that, she dove into another round of mechanical mayhem, the anomaly a stubborn itch at the back of her mind. As the hours dragged on, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stumbled onto something monumental, something that could rewrite the rules of the universe, or at least bend them. A few hours later, with the stabilizers stable, miraculously, Sienna found herself alone in the observation deck. It was her favorite spot, a place to watch the universe turn slowly kaleidoscopic. Stars flickered like distant fireworks, and the wormhole's swirling mass loomed large, a cosmic drainpipe. She cradled a mug of coffee that tasted more like regret than caffeine and stared out into the vast, uncaring emptiness. "You ever think there's something more out there?" she asked, even though nobody was around to answer. Yes, she replied to herself, more empty space and more things to fix. But that anomaly, that sliver of potential, danced in her mind like a rebellious thought. Maybe, just maybe, it could be the key to something she'd always dreamed of. A society where humanity didn't just survive but thrived, where the scales weren't so damn uneven. And maybe she'd be the one to tip them, or at least give them a good shove. The universe, as usual, didn't have much to say. It just kept turning, indifferent and infinite. But for Sienna, the idea of change was enough to keep her going, enough to light the way through the wormhole's murky depths. She'd have to be careful, though. There were powers in the galaxy that liked things just the way they were, and poking the bear could have consequences. Not that she'd ever let that stop her. As she stared into the abyss, her mind full of possibilities, Sienna Drake knew one thing for certain: she wasn't done yet, far from it. There was a fight ahead, one she'd have to face armed with nothing but wit, grit, and a stubborn refusal to quit. "Bring it on," she whispered to the stars. With a last sip of her insipid coffee, she turned away from the void, ready to tackle the next challenge, whatever it might be. But the anomaly, that whisper of change, lingered in her thoughts, a promise of something greater. And maybe, just maybe, she'd find a way to make it reality, one sarcastic quip at a time. As Sienna Drake stared at the anomaly data, the excitement tingling in her fingertips was overshadowed by the reality that she was about to share this discovery with Rylex, the station's resident skeptic. Rylex was a non-human, a lanky creature with 3 eyes that glowed a sickly green, and a disposition somewhere between a grumpy cat and a disappointed schoolteacher. His species was as unpronounceable as his outlook was bleak, and he'd made skepticism an art form. She found him in his usual nook, which he insisted on calling his workspace, but was really just a corner filled with spare parts and questionable hygiene. The alien's eyes flicked over her, registering her presence with the same enthusiasm one might reserve for an overdue tax bill. "Ah, Sienna," Rylex sighed, adjusting his posture with the grace of a folding chair. "To what do I owe this dubious pleasure?" "Here to enlighten me with another human breakthrough, like your species' infamous invention of sliced bread," Sienna smirked, knowing better than to take his jabs personally. "I need your eyes on something," she said, holding out the holotab like a peace offering. "Found an anomaly. And no, it's not just space junk." Rylex took the device, his fingers scuttling across the screen with arachnid efficiency. His bulbous eyes narrowed as he processed the data. "Well, this is certainly odd enough to distract you from your daily grumbling," Sienna asked. "Barely," Rylex replied, but Sienna could see the faintest flicker of intrigue. "What do you think it is? That's the million-credit question, isn't it?" "Could be a new form of energy, a message from intelligent life, or maybe the universe's most elaborate prank call. Knowing your luck, I'd bet on the prank call," Rylex muttered. He continued to scroll, his eyes flicking with the kind of interest that bordered on reluctant respect. "This anomaly is disrupting the stabilizers, isn't it? You noticed. Hard not to when the station systems are throwing tantrums worse than a toddler on candy withdrawal." Sienna nodded. As if on cue, the lights flickered and an alarm blared somewhere in the background. "That's new," she said dryly. "More noise to add to the symphony of disaster." Symphony. "Please, this is more like a cacophony performed by drunkards with tin instruments." Touché. They were interrupted by another alarm, louder, more insistent. The wormhole itself was in distress, its swirling maw shimmering with unstable energy. It was like watching the galaxy's biggest blender short-circuit. Rylex's eyes widened. "Do you think the anomaly is causing this? If it destabilizes the wormhole, the entire crossroad could collapse into cosmic confetti. I was hoping for a simpler problem like a killer space virus or an unscheduled alien invasion," Sienna quipped, though her stomach clenched at the thought. We need to report this. Rylex's skepticism deepened into something more pragmatic. Who do we inform? The corporate overlords whose sole purpose is to bleed this place dry. Do you have a better idea? Maybe you've got a hotline to the universe's customer service. Unfortunately, their hold music is atrocious. Rylex deadpanned. Fine, let's inform the brass, but don't expect them to be helpful. They'll probably just send a memo telling us to synergize our efforts or some other corporate nonsense. Great. More meaningless jargon to make our lives harder, Sienna sighed. They made their way to the control deck, a place buzzing with the kind of frantic energy usually reserved for panicked stockbrokers or overcaffeinated interns. The corporate powers that be were huddled around their holo displays, their suits more polished than their morals. Jax Veltro was there too, looking like he'd been yanked out of a nightmare and thrust into this one. He spotted Sienna and Rylex, his expression like he'd just bitten into a lemon. Drake, Rylex, please tell me the sky isn't falling, Jax grumbled, voice like gravel rattling in a tin can. Not exactly, Sienna replied. It's more like the universe is having a temper tantrum. Jax raised a bushy eyebrow. Care to elaborate? Rylex was all too happy to chime in. The anomaly we've detected is affecting the wormhole more profoundly than a toddler with a marker and a white wall. Systems are destabilizing, and you're sure this isn't just another glitch. Glitches don't usually come with a side of cosmic disaster, Sienna replied. The corporate suits exchanged glances, their faces a mix of skepticism and annoyance. One of them, a particularly smarmy figure named Corin, spoke up. Is this going to affect our bottom line? Rylex snorted. If by bottom line you mean continued existence, then yes, quite possibly. Jack sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. All right. Let's not panic, yet. Drake, I need you and Rylex to get to the bottom of this. Fast. If this anomaly disrupts operations, it's your ass on the line. Gee, thanks for the motivational speech, Sienna replied, rolling her eyes. Corin, never one to miss a chance to be insufferable, smirked. Failure is not an option here, Drake. Neither is reason, apparently, muttered Rylex. The meeting dissolved into a mess of orders and thinly veiled threats, leaving Sienna and Rylex to return to their investigation. They worked side by side, sifting through data streams and deciphering the anomaly as best they could. The hours slipped by in a haze of numbers and frustration. This data stream, Rylex said, pointing to a particularly chaotic section, it's like it's trying to tell us something. Maybe it's the universe's way of saying get lost, Sienna suggested. Or you're all doomed, Rylex countered with a dry chuckle. As they worked, the wormhole's behavior grew more erratic, its energies crackling with an intensity that set their nerves on edge. It was like trying to mend a broken vase while it's still falling. Think we'll figure it out before the whole thing blows sky high? Sienna asked. I give us 50-50 odds, Rylex replied. But then again, I'm an optimist. The irony wasn't lost on her, and despite the dire situation, she couldn't help but chuckle. We're so screwed, yes, Rylex agreed. But at least we'll go down in history as the ones who found something worth screwing up, assuming there's anyone left to write history, Sienna added with grim humor. With each flicker of the wormhole, the pressure mounted. The corporate suits were breathing down their necks, demanding updates as though their incessant questioning would magically produce solutions. A voice crackled over the station's intercom. Report to the observation deck. We need eyes on the wormhole now. Sounds like we're needed, Rylex said, his expression as serious as he could muster. Gee, I wonder why, Sienna retorted, though her feet were already moving. The observation deck was a hive of activity, engineers and tech scrambling, their faces a tapestry of tension and determination. The wormhole loomed large, its swirling mass a volatile storm of energy. Holy hell, Sienna muttered. The wormhole flickered ominously, its colors shifting in a way that suggested it was one bad mood swing away from imploding. The spectacle was both mesmerizing and terrifying, like a fireworks display put on by a pyromaniac with a grudge. This isn't just an anomaly, Rylex said, staring out at the cosmic tempest. It's a damn catastrophe waiting to happen, and we're the lucky lottery winners who get to live through it, Sienna replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Do you think it wants something? Rylex mused, his mind working through the puzzle with relentless curiosity. Maybe it just wants a hug, Sienna quipped, or a stiff drink, Rylex added. As they watched, the wormhole's instability grew, the once steady pulses of energy now erratic and unpredictable. The station's alarms were a constant backdrop, a soundtrack to their impending doom. We need to figure this out, Sienna said, her voice firm despite the chaos. If we don't stabilize the wormhole, well, let's just say the concept of bad day will be redefined. No pressure then, Rylex replied with a dry chuckle. They returned to their makeshift workstation, diving back into the data with the fervor of desperate souls clinging to the last shreds of sanity. The anomaly was a stubborn beast, its secrets hidden beneath layers of inscrutable data. Think we'll solve it? Sienna asked, her eyes flicking between the screens. If anyone can, it's us, Rylex said, and though his words were laced with his usual sarcasm, there was a hint of faith buried within. The minutes ticked by, and with each passing second the anomaly's influence seemed to grow. The station's systems whined in protest, their circuits straining against the onslaught of energy. Found something interesting, Rylex finally said, pointing to a section of the data that pulsed with an unfamiliar rhythm. If we can isolate this signal, we might be able to counteract the destabilization. Or we might blow the whole station sky high, Sienna pointed out. Well, they did say failure wasn't an option, Rylex replied, flashing a grin that was anything but reassuring. Sienna knew they were racing against time, the anomaly a ticking bomb that threatened to tear the station apart. But in the midst of chaos, there was a strange sort of clarity, a sense that maybe, just maybe, they could pull off the impossible. All right, let's do this, Sienna said, her voice firm and determined. Agreed, Rylex replied, his fingers flying over the controls with practiced ease. Together, they worked to isolate the anomaly's signal, their efforts a last-ditch gamble in a game where the stakes were higher than they'd ever imagined. But for Sienna, it was more than just a fight for survival. It was a chance to prove that amid the universe's indifference, there was still room for defiance. The anomaly loomed large, a reminder of the vast and uncaring cosmos. But within its chaos, Sienna and Rylex found purpose, a reason to keep fighting even when the odds were stacked against them. As the station trembled under the onslaught of cosmic forces, Sienna whispered a silent vow to herself, a promise to see this through, no matter the cost. Because in the end, sometimes a good fight was all you had. And Sienna Drake had never been one to back down. The observation deck felt like a pressure cooker cranked to the max, the tension so thick you could cut it with a dull space knife. Of course, Executive Valther had decided to make his grand entrance, flanked by an entourage of yes-men who looked like they'd been assembled from a factory line of smarminess. Valther was the kind of guy who could smell profit in a vacuum and had a face that screamed trust fund. He surveyed the chaos with the air of a man whose primary concern was how it might affect his stock portfolio. "What's the status?" he barked, as if he expected the universe to bend to his will. "The wormhole's about to pop like a champagne cork at a Wall Street party," Sienna replied, not bothering to disguise her disdain. "Charming," Valther said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I assume you have a solution." "Oh sure, I'll just wave my magic wand and fix everything," Sienna shot back. "We're working on it, but you know, science takes time," Rylex added. "Unless you want to donate your brainpower, we'll keep doing our jobs." Valther ignored the jibe. "We've decided to implement strict control measures to prevent further destabilization. If necessary, we'll shut down the wormhole." Sienna felt her stomach drop. Shut it down? That's not a solution. That's sticking your head in the sand and hoping the problem goes away. "Not my problem if it does," Valther replied with a shrug. "Just make sure it doesn't affect our quarterly earnings." "Quarterly? Seriously?" Rylex looked like he might short-circuit from disbelief. If the wormhole collapses, there won't be any earnings, or a quarter, or a bloody universe. Your job is to prevent that, Valther said, turning away as if the matter was settled. Sienna and Rylex exchanged a glance, the kind of look that spoke volumes in silence. If Valther had his way, they'd all be orbiting a black hole of bureaucracy before long. As Valther's entourage trooped out, Sienna turned to Rylex. We can't let them shut it down. There's something in that anomaly. Something worth more than the combined arrogance of corporate overlords. You think it's the key to unlimited wealth? Because they'd sell their grandmother for a new revenue stream. Not wealth, Sienna said, her mind racing. Think about it, unlimited energy, resources, post-scarcity. No more fighting over scraps. Rylex's third eye blinked. You think it could really change everything? Sienna nodded. But not if they close it like a bad investment. We need people who see beyond the bottom line. Great. Where do we find them? The annual meeting of idealists, Sienna grinned. In this dump, we'll find them lurking around the edges. Like us. They slipped out of the observation deck and into the labyrinthine corridors of the station, a place that felt like a cross between a prison and a casino, a monument to humanity's ability to make even galactic travel feel like a commuter train from hell. Their first stop was the break room, a place that smelled faintly of despair and reheated space rations. A few engineers huddled over their holotabs, eyes glazed from too many eyes staring at screens. Hey, if any of you are interested in something other than corporate servitude, we might have a proposition, Sienna announced, leaning against the doorway like she was selling contraband. One of the engineers, a wiry guy with hair like a static-charged mop, looked up. What kind of proposition? If it's a pyramid scheme, I'm out. I already lost all my savings on space crypto. Nothing that stupid, Rylex said. We're talking about doing something that matters. Changing the game. A woman with a streak of silver in her hair raised an eyebrow. You mean like a revolution, more like evolution, Sienna said. We've found something in the anomaly that could change everything. But we need people willing to think for themselves. There was a moment of silence, the kind that stretches out like a piece of gum under a desk before the woman spoke again. All right, I'm in. Beats working for these corporate zombies. The mop-haired guy nodded. Count me in too. Anything's better than another day in this soul-sucking station. As they cobbled together a motley crew of like-minded rebels, Sienna couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this ragtag bunch of misfits could do something the suits upstairs would never see coming. They reconvened in Rylex's nook, a cluttered space filled with spare parts and dubious inventions. The kind of place that screamed health code violation but felt like home when the rest of the universe was out to lunch. All right, Sienna said, addressing their newfound allies. We know the anomaly's unstable, but we believe it holds the potential for a post-scarcity future. We just need to figure out how to harness it without corporate interference. The silver-haired woman, whose name was Alia, leaned forward. We need information, something to give us an edge. Already working on it, Rylex said, tapping away at his holotab. We've got the data stream. Now we just need to decode it. Mophair, who introduced himself as Dex, chimed in. I might be able to help with that. I used to work with code breakers before I got into, well, let's just say less legal ventures. Great, Sienna said. The sooner we figure this out, the better. Valther's breathing down our necks, speaking of which, Rylex added, we need to keep this under wraps. If they catch wind, we're screwed. Alia grinned, an edge of defiance in her smile. Let them try. I've spent years slipping through corporate fingers. They won't know what hit them. The group huddled around the holotab, their combined focus a beacon of determination in the face of an uncaring universe. The anomaly's data stream was a labyrinth of chaos, but together they picked it apart, bit by bit. Iors blurred into a fugue of numbers and shifting patterns, their minds working in tandem like a well-oiled machine. The kind of synergy corporate loved to blather about but never actually achieved. We're close, Rylex finally announced, his voice tinged with excitement. There's a pattern here. If we can sync it with the stabilizer, we might be able to harness the anomaly without blowing ourselves to bits. Big if there, Sienna pointed out. But it's a start. They worked through the night, fueled by anxiety and too much synthetic caffeine, their efforts a testament to human stubbornness. Around them, the station buzzed with the low hum of impending doom, a constant reminder of the stakes. As the first hints of simulated dawn crept through the station's chronometers, they paused to take stock. A ragtag assembly of rebels, brought together by the hope of something greater. "This might just work," Alia said, her voice weary but hopeful. "Might is a strong word," Dex added, "but then again, we're not exactly swimming in certainty." Sienna leaned back, exhaustion tugging at her bones. "Whatever happens, at least we tried. Better than sitting on our hands while the universe collapses," agreed, Rylek said. "We're playing a long shot, but those are the only shots worth taking." Their plan still had more holes than a piece of Swiss cheese, but it was theirs. A chance to do more than just survive. To live, even if it meant risking everything. As they prepared for the next step, Sienna felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever the outcome, they were in this together. A group of misfits against the cosmos. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The observation deck buzzed with the kind of tension you'd expect from a circus act balancing on the edge of a knife. Sienna and her ragtag group of nonconformists were holed up in Rylex's nook, their collective mood as upbeat as a funeral in a thunderstorm. The air was thick with the scent of burnt wires and caffeine, a heady mix that kept them upright when all they wanted was to collapse into a heap of existential dread. "Got any more of that sludge you call coffee?" Alia asked, waving an empty mug in Rylex's direction. "If I'm going to keep staring at code until my eyeballs revolt, I'd rather do it caffeinated." Rylex handed her a steaming cup. "Careful. It's strong enough to jump-start a black hole," Dex snorted. "At least if we all die, we'll be wide awake for it." Jax Veltro, their resident grump and Sienna's reluctant supervisor, popped his head in, his expression that of someone caught between a rock and an explosion. "Sienna, you've stirred up a hornet's nest." "Valther's breathing down my neck, demanding to know why productivity's dropped." Sienna sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Tell him we're busy trying to save his precious wormhole from imploding. And his quarterly earnings along with it. You know he doesn't care about the science." "Just the bottom line," Jax replied, voice rough as gravel. "He's ramping up security, too. Wants to make sure no one's plotting any funny business." "Great, just what we need." "A security state," Alia muttered, taking a sip of her drink. "Tastes like rebellion." "Well, we've got to stay one step ahead," Sienna said, rallying her troops. "The anomaly's data is our ticket to changing everything. We've just got to decode the damn thing before Valther shuts us down." Rylex nodded, his mechanical eye flashing ominously. "We'll need a distraction. Something to keep the suits preoccupied while we work." Jack scratched his chin, thinking. "We could stage a protest. Get the other workers involved. Nothing says corporate headache like disgruntled employees en masse." "Perfect," Sienna said. "And if Valther tries to shut us up, we'll use that opportunity to slip past his security and access the mainframe." "Classic misdirection," Dex said with a grin. "We're turning this place into a sci-fi Robin Hood flick." As they hashed out the details, the rest of the station continued its slow spiral into chaos. The wormhole was the universe's equivalent of an unmonitored toddler, a ticking time bomb of cosmic proportions, ready to throw a tantrum at any moment. The workers were restless, their grumbling growing as pervasive as the hum of the station's life support. Sienna's dream of post-scarcity society was catching on, a whispered promise of a better future that spread like wildfire through the ranks. "The workers are on board," Jax informed them later, his usually dire demeanor lightened by a hint of mischief. "They're ready to march." Even the coffee machines joined the cause. "Fantastic," Sienna said. "Let's give Valther a show he won't forget." The protest began like a slow, rolling wave, workers pouring from every corner of the station to gather in the main concourse. Placards were hastily crafted from whatever materials were handy, old screens, repurposed panels, and things that probably weren't meant to be written on. "What do we want?" "Not to die," chanted a particularly vocal group as they marched past Valther's office, their voices echoing down the sterile corridors. Valther, predictably, was not amused. His face was a thundercloud of irritation as he barked orders into his comm. "Get security on this. Shut it down." While his attention was diverted, Sienna and her crew slipped through the crowd, ducking into a maintenance hatch that led straight to the mainframe room, the heart of the station's operations where the real magic or catastrophe could happen. "Quickly," Alia urged, ushering them through the hatch. "We don't have much time." The mainframe room was a maze of flickering lights and humming servers. Rylex immediately got to work, plugging his holotab into the central console, his fingers dancing over the keys with practiced ease. "Dex, keep an eye on the door," Sienna instructed, her voice a hushed urgency. "We don't want any uninvited guests." "Roger that," Dex replied, taking up position by the entrance, his gaze alternating between the corridor and the chaotic flurry of activity within. As Rylex navigated the maze of data streams, Sienna paced behind him, her mind racing with the possibilities. The anomaly held the key to limitless energy, an endless supply that could fuel ships, stations, entire planets. A future without scarcity, without need or want. "Got it," Rylex exclaimed, his voice a triumphant bark. "I've synced the data. We can stabilize the wormhole and harness its power." "Let's hope it works," Alia said, crossing her fingers. "Otherwise, we'll be the galaxy's biggest fireworks display." Sienna grinned, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. "Here goes nothing." Rylex initiated the sequence, and the mainframe room came alive with energy, the hum of technology reaching a fever pitch. The wormhole's unstable chaos was soothed, its turbulent edges smoothing out like a placid sea after a storm. At that exact moment the station shuddered, a low rumble running through its bones. The wormhole was stabilizing, the anomaly's potential finally under control. They'd done it. "Now we just need to keep it that way," Sienna said, her voice taut with the weight of the moment. Before Valther realizes we've outplayed him, the celebration was short-lived. An alarm blared through the station, a shrill scream that sent everyone into overdrive. "Security breach." Dex shouted from his post, his voice barely audible over the noise. "Time to go." Alia yelled, already halfway out the door. They bolted, racing through the chaotic corridors as security forces scrambled to regain control. Valther's voice crackled over the intercom, furious and impotent. "Stop them. Don't let them escape." But they were already gone, slipping into the teeming crowd of protesters, their faces lost among the throng. A sea of discontent that surged around them, carrying them away from the chaos and into the safety of anonymity. Back in the safety of Rylex's nook, they regrouped, breathless and buzzing with adrenaline. "We did it," Sienna said, her voice a mix of disbelief and triumph. "We actually did it." "Let's hope it sticks," Rylex said, his smile weary but genuine. "We might just have bought the universe a future." Jax nodded, his expression softening just a fraction. "Maybe there's hope for us yet." As they sat there, catching their breath and soaking in the moment, Sienna felt a strange sense of peace. The odds had been stacked against them from the start, but they'd persevered. They'd fought for something greater than themselves, and in doing so, had become part of a legacy that would echo through the stars. For the first time, the station didn't feel like a prison. It felt like the starting point of something extraordinary. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Valther's crackdown came down like a hammer on a particularly rebellious nail, and the station's mood shifted from tense to downright malignant. The buzz of hope that had briefly flared like a supernova was snuffed out, leaving behind a burnt-out husk of collective disillusionment. With security beefed up to levels that would make a totalitarian regime blush, the temperature in Rylex's nook, a haven for malcontents and caffeine addicts, dropped to sub-zero levels of paranoia. "Valther's going full tyrant," Jax said, slumping into a chair that had seen better days. He's got security crawling all over the place like lice on a space hobo. Sienna leaned against a wall, arms crossed, her head a storm of thoughts. He's scared. We rattled his cage and now he's throwing everything he has at us. Great. So we're the mice in his cataclysmic game of cat and mouse, Dex quipped, tossing a stress ball from hand to hand. Except our lives are the stakes, not some cheese. Rylex, ever the pragmatist, was tinkering with a small device that looked suspiciously like it could either save them or blow a hole in the station. If he's upping the ante, that means he knows we're onto something. We just need to figure out what his next move is. Alia, huddled in her usual spot with a mug that might as well have been surgically attached, spoke up, her voice tinged with ironic cheer. Knowing Valthar, his next move is likely to involve a lot of shooting. Maybe we should start wearing targets on our backs. Wouldn't make much difference, Sienna responded dryly. He's not exactly known for precision strikes. More like carpet bombing. The grim reality was setting in. For all their bravado and clever schemes, they were up against a corporate machine with resources that made their own look like a child's piggy bank. The wormhole was still a volatile beast, teetering on the brink of collapse, and unless they acted fast, it would take the station and everyone on it straight into oblivion. Maybe we could try reasoning with him, Alia suggested, half joking, half desperate. Dex snorted. Yeah, like I reason with my ex. We all know how that usually ends badly. Or, Jax interjected, we could focus on creating a diversion big enough to buy us some time. And by diversion, you mean? Sienna raised an eyebrow, hoping he wasn't about to suggest something like juggling plasma grenades. Something loud, flashy, and impossible to ignore, Jax said, his grizzled face lighting up with a mischievous grin that would have made the devil take notes. Rylex nodded, a gleam in his mechanical eye. We could use the station's old comms array. It's outdated but still capable of broadcasting across the sector. We hijack it, send out a distress signal, something that'll draw attention. Or, Sienna cut in, we broadcast Valthar's dirty laundry for the whole cosmos to see. Hit him where it hurts, his reputation. Dex laughed. I love it. Nothing like a good smear campaign to really ruin someone's day. They quickly set to work, their little corner of rebellion humming with renewed purpose. Rylex and Sienna huddled over the holotab, fingers flying across the interface as they pieced together a digital dossier of Valthar's misdeeds. Meanwhile, Jax and Dex rummaged through Rylex's stash of spare parts, cobbling together a makeshift transmitter. Let's get this show on the road, Alia said, raising her mug in a mock toast to impending chaos. It took longer than they'd hoped, each tick of the clock a reminder of their precarious position. But finally, they had something, proof of Valthar's less-than-savory activities, from financial foul play to some very questionable expense claims. Enough to make even the most apathetic shareholders sit up and take notice. Time to air some dirty laundry, Sienna announced, as Rylex initiated the broadcast. The station's comms crackled to life, echoing through every corner of the station and beyond. Valthar's face appeared on screens, looking as if someone had just stolen his lunch money and kicked his puppy for good measure. He sputtered and flailed, his fury palpable even through a flickering holoscreen. Shut it down. Shut it all down, he shrieked, to no avail. The station trembled as if sharing his fury, and for a moment, Sienna feared the whole place was going to tear itself apart. This had better work, Jax muttered, eyes scanning the room as if expecting security to burst in at any moment. It didn't take long for the response. Valthar's personal security forces, not known for their subtlety, started making their way through the station, their presence like a swarm of angry wasps. The tension in Rylex's nook was so thick, it could have been cut with a plasma cutter. Time to make ourselves scarce, Rylex said, grabbing his gear with a practiced efficiency. As they slipped out, the station a maze of chaos and confusion, Sienna felt the weight of their situation press down on her like a black hole. They'd managed to buy themselves some time, but Valthar's retaliation would be swift and merciless. The corridors were a blur as they made their way toward the evacuation pods, hoping against hope that they could outrun the inevitable backlash. The wormhole, ever the unpredictable beast, loomed large in their minds, its instability growing by the second. "We have to stabilize it," Sienna said, heart pounding. "If it collapses, it's over for everyone." "No pressure, then," Dex quipped, though his voice was strained. Just the fate of the universe and all. As they reached the pods, a chilling realization hit Sienna. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Even if they managed to escape, the wormhole's collapse would render it all pointless, a Pyrrhic victory at best. But there was no going back now. They piled into a pod, the cramped space a stark reminder of just how little separated them from the void. "Here goes nothing," Alia whispered, clutching her mug like a talisman. The pod shuddered to life, shooting away from the station with a gut-wrenching lurch. Behind them, the station seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a hulking beast of metal and desperation. As they sped towards the wormhole's looming maw, Sienna's mind whirled with the enormity of it all. They were gambling everything on a last-ditch effort, a Hail Mary play that defied logic and reason. "Time to do or die," Jack said, echoing the sentiment that hung heavy in the air. Rylex fiddled with the controls, his focus intense. "If we can just—" there. His voice was triumphant, though his expression remained grim. "I've bypassed the controls. We have a shot at stabilizing it." The wormhole flickered before them, an angry storm of color and fury. As Rylex initiated the sequence, the pod rocked violently, the sheer force of the cosmic tempest threatening to tear them apart. "Hold on," Sienna shouted, her voice barely audible over the cacophony. With a final, gut-wrenching jolt, the wormhole began to calm, its chaotic edges smoothing out if only just. It wasn't perfect and it wouldn't hold forever, but it was something, a lifeline in the vast, uncaring void. "We did it," Alia breathed, though her relief was tempered with the knowledge of how precarious their situation remained. They were far from safe, and the specter of Valther's retribution loomed large. But for now, they had a chance, a fragile hope in a universe that cared little for such things. As the pod drifted away from the station, battered but intact, Sienna allowed herself a small smile. They'd faced their darkest ire and emerged, if not victorious, then at least defiant. And sometimes, in a cosmos as indifferent as theirs, that was victory enough. "Here's to surviving another day," Dex said, his voice a mix of weary humor and grim determination. "Or at least making sure we go out with a bang," Jax added, ever the realist. In the end, they were just a ragtag group of misfits, holding on by their fingertips in the vast expanse of space. But they were together, and that meant the universe's indifference had met its match. For now, the wormhole crossroad remained, a tenuous thread connecting humanity to the cosmos. A reminder that even in the darkest corners of the universe, hope could still flicker, stubborn and unyielding. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep fighting for. The pod hadn't quite stopped shuddering before Jax launched into his usual brand of motivational speech, the kind that left you wondering if life was worth living. "Well, folks, looks like we've managed to avoid an immediate fiery death. That's gotta count for something, right?" "Yeah," Dex chimed in, cramming himself into a corner that was slightly less uncomfortable than the rest of the pod. "We're not dead, yet, but who knows what fresh hell tomorrow will bring. I, for one, can't wait." Sienna, wedged between a panel and Jax, ignored the bickering. Her focus was on her holotab, its screen flickering with the kind of erratic enthusiasm that suggested it might join in on the chaos any minute. She had been poring over the anomaly data since they'd crammed into this sardine can with thrusters, and as the pod lurched forward, a new thought struck her. "All right," she announced, trying to inject some authority into her voice. "I think I've got something." "You mean besides the imminent prospect of Valther's private army coming down on us like a meteor shower?" Alia asked, the mug of whatever she was drinking that was probably eating through the ceramic still firmly in her grasp. "No, something useful," Sienna snapped, though she couldn't help but smirk. "The anomaly. It's not just a threat." Dex raised an eyebrow, his skepticism almost tangible. You mean besides threatening to swallow us whole like the universe's least friendly black hole? Yeah, I think we can harness it, Sienna replied, her eyes locked on the swirling data. Think of it like, I don't know, a cosmic power source. If we stabilize it, it could supply more energy than Valther's entire operation. Jax leaned forward, a cynical glint in his eye. So you're saying it's a giant battery with an attitude problem, and you can turn it into a solution instead of a death sentence. Something like that, Sienna said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. But we have to act fast. If the anomaly collapses, we're toast. Rylex, who had been silently fiddling with some piece of tech that looked suspiciously explosive, finally spoke up. You do realize that if this goes wrong, we'll be the first humans to reach the afterlife via cosmic implosion, right? Sienna shrugged. Hey, at least we'll be making history. That's something, right? Yeah, Alia added with a dry chuckle. The kind they write on novelty tombstones. Despite the banter, there was a renewed sense of urgency. Sienna's discovery was the kind of gamble that could flip their bleak situation into something more than a desperate struggle for survival. It was the kind of crazy plan that could only be concocted by someone with nothing left to lose. All right, Jax said, clapping his hands together as if preparing for battle, which, in a way, he was. We've got a plan that's equal parts genius and suicidal. Let's turn this thing around and shove it down Valther's throat. The pod hummed with a new energy, or maybe that was just the engine threatening to give out. Either way, they had a destination now, the heart of the wormhole anomaly. A place where life and death played a game of cosmic chicken, and they were betting everything on the outcome. As they traveled, the interior of the pod became a makeshift war room. Rylex, who seemed to have a penchant for turning junk into miracles, was cobbling together some kind of interface that would allow them to interact with the anomaly. The device was a Frankenstein's monster of wires, circuits, and the occasional spark. But if anyone could make it work, it was him. Okay, so assuming this thing doesn't turn us into a stellar nursery, Rylex said, brandishing the device with the kind of excitement usually reserved for mad scientists, we should be able to tap into the anomaly's energy and control it. Control it, Dex mused, scratching his chin. Like a cosmic marionette. Pull the right strings and it dances to your tune. More like coaxing a wild beast to play nice, Rylex replied, adjusting a particularly stubborn wire. If it works, we might be able to use its power to not just stabilize it, but to keep Valther's goons at bay. Or, Alia interjected, we could end up as cosmic confetti. But hey, what's life without a bit of risk? As they approached the wormhole, the tension in the pod was thicker than Sienna's stubborn streak. Everyone had their roles to play, their minds focused on the task at hand. If they survived this, it would be nothing short of a miracle. If not, at least they'd go out swinging. The pod's proximity sensors pinged with all the enthusiasm of a digital watchdog on too much caffeine, indicating they were close enough to the anomaly to make a move. The swirling mass of cosmic energy loomed before them, a kaleidoscope of potential doom and salvation. Showtime, Jax muttered, strapping himself into a seat that looked like it had been built during a time when health and safety were considered optional. Rylex, you ready? Sienna asked, turning to their resident tinkerer whose hands were a blur of activity. As ready as I'll ever be to attempt something that's likely to get us all killed, he replied, not missing a beat. But if this works, it'll be one hell of a story. Assuming we're around to tell it, Dex said, his voice laced with the kind of humor only someone who'd kissed death on the cheek and lived could muster. Sienna took a deep breath, her fingers dancing over the holo-tab as she initiated the interface. The pod systems buzzed with anticipation, or possibly fear, as they linked with the anomaly. The universe seemed to hold its breath, a cosmic audience to their high-wire act without a safety net. Here goes nothing, she murmured, activating the device. For a moment, the world held still. Then the anomaly pulsed, a shudder that rippled through the pod like a shockwave. Alarms blared, lights flickered, and for a split second it felt like everything was about to fly apart. Then just as suddenly it stabilized. The anomaly, once a seething mass of chaos, settled into a rhythmic pulse. It was still dangerous, still unpredictable, but now it was contained, mostly. Whatever Rylex had done, it worked. For now, anyway. Well, I'll be damned, Jack said, grinning despite himself. We did it. We might actually live to see another miserable day. It ain't over yet, Sienna cautioned, though a smile tugged at her lips. We've got a long way to go before we can relax. As if the universe wasn't content to let them savor their small victory, the pod's comm system crackled to life. The voice on the other end was unmistakable, Executive Valther, his tone dripping with smarmy disdain. So, you've managed to keep yourselves alive a little longer, Valther drawled, his image flickering on the pod's console like a particularly unpleasant ghost. But you can't hide forever. My forces will find you. Alia leaned in, her face inches from the screen. Oh, Valther, you're like a cockroach. No matter how often we squash you, you just keep coming back. Valther's expression twisted into a sneer. Enjoy your temporary reprieve. I'll see to it personally that you and your little crew are made examples of. Looking forward to it, Jack said, his voice laced with mock enthusiasm. Who doesn't love a good reunion? The comm cut off, Valther's threat still echoing in the cramped space. The pod was quiet for a moment, the only sound the hum of the stabilizing anomaly. Well, Dex said, breaking the silence. He's charming, reminds me of my mother-in-law. Sienna shook her head, fighting the urge to laugh. We've bought ourselves some time, but we need to figure out our next move. We can't keep running forever. True, Rylex said, adjusting a wire on his device. But we've got the anomaly on our side now. That's something Valther didn't see coming. And we can use it to turn the tables, Sienna agreed, her mind racing with possibilities. If we can harness its energy, we might just have a fighting chance. Jax nodded, his expression as determined as it was weary. All right, comrades, time to plan our next act of defiance. Let's give Valther a show he won't soon forget. Or at least one that'll make him wish he'd chosen a different career path, Alia added with a wry grin. As they drifted through the void, their future uncertain but their resolve stronger than ever, they knew one thing for sure. They'd face the darkness and come out the other side, a little battered but unbroken. And in a universe that seemed hell-bent on grinding them into stardust, that was something worth fighting for. Sienna stared at the swirling mass of horror masquerading as potential, this cosmic power source, knowing they were about to poke it with a metaphorical stick. At least, if they went up in flames, they'd be a colorful explosion. Valther's army would probably charge them for the fireworks. Jax, ever the beacon of misplaced optimism, clapped his hands. All right, folks, let's stick it to Valther. We're pushing the big red button on this operation. Rylex, you got that interface sorted. Rylex looked up from his gadget of nightmares, a tangled mess of wires and circuits in his hands. Assuming this thing doesn't decide to blow us up yet, we're good to go. Alia grinned, her mug of corrosive liquid sloshing dangerously. I always wanted to go out with a bang. Better than dying in a cubicle of boredom, right? Dex rolled his eyes. You mean we don't get to just clock out and quietly retire? Damn. I was really looking forward to dying of old age surrounded by cats. While the pod hummed with the energy of impending doom, Sienna's fingers danced over her holotab. The swirling data was like a chaotic symphony, and she was the conductor desperately trying to keep the orchestra from spontaneously combusting. Okay, she said, her voice firm despite her racing heart. We use the anomaly's energy to disrupt Valther's systems. We've got one shot at this, so no pressure. No pressure at all, Jax retorted. Just our lives and the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. You know, a slow Tuesday. Rylex adjusted his mechanical eye. The only piece of him that didn't look like it was about to short-circuit. Let's make history, or at least something Valther can't put in a PowerPoint. With the plan set, the group braced for a ride through chaos. The pod hurtled forward, the anomaly's energy crackling around them like static on an old TV. The interface hummed ominously, a testament to Rylex's questionable genius. As they neared the wormhole's heart, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Sienna initiated the sequence, and the pod was engulfed in a cacophony of alarms, lights, and the unsettling sensation that they were about to become intimately acquainted with the inside of a black hole. For a moment, time stretched thin like a rubber band pulled to its limit. Then, with a defiant roar, the anomaly responded. Energy surged through the pod, and the systems around Valther's fortress of greed began to flicker and fail. "Looks like we got their attention," Alia said, her grin as wide as it was reckless. Dex swore as the pod's systems lurched, the interface sputtering but holding. "This is it, folks. We're either heroes or cosmic dust." Outside, Valther's station was a hive of chaos. Systems blinked on and off like a cosmic disco, and in the chaos, Sienna's team moved like shadows. The distraction they'd created was enough. Valther's forces were scattered, scrambling to respond to an enemy they couldn't see. "Valther's going to love this," Jack said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Someone should make sure to send him a fruit basket." Alia chuckled darkly. "I doubt he'll appreciate the gesture." Besides, what goes with Crow? Back in the pod, Sienna's mind was a storm, grappling with 100 calculations at once. The anomaly was a beast barely contained, its energy volatile and unpredictable. But it was theirs for now. As their makeshift controls hummed with power, the group moved to execute the next phase of their plan. Rylex's device, once a jumble of parts, now pulsed with life. It was the key to their victory or their demise. "Time to give Valther a taste of his own medicine," Sienna said, her voice hard as steel. Dex smirked. "And by medicine you mean cosmic retribution, right?" "Exactly," she replied, her eyes glinting with defiance. "Let's see how he likes having his stock options crash." The pod surged forward, driven by a will stronger than fear. As they neared the heart of Valther's operation, the station's defenses flared to life, desperate to contain the threat. But it was too late. The anomaly's energy, channeled through Rylex's Frankenstein device, disrupted everything. Lights flickered, systems failed, and the once mighty fortress of greed began to crumble under its own weight. "Looks like we hit the jackpot," Jack said, a manic gleam in his eye. "We're not dead yet," Alia reminded him, though her smile was uncharacteristically hopeful. Sienna's hands flew over the holotab, directing the anomaly's energy like a conductor wielding a whip. The station's defenses collapsed, and for the first time it seemed possible they might actually pull this off. Back on the station, Valther watched as his empire fell apart around him. His private army, once an unstoppable force, was now in disarray. Panic spread like wildfire, and in the chaos, Sienna and her team pressed their advantage. "We're doing it," Sienna said, hardly daring to believe it. "Yeah," Rylex replied, his voice tinged with disbelief. "And we haven't exploded yet." As the station's systems continued to fail, Valther's hold on power diminished. The once invincible corporation was a shadow of its former self, a lesson in hubris and the dangers of underestimating human tenacity. "Time for the grand finale," Jax declared, his eyes alight with the thrill of rebellion. With one final surge, they directed the anomaly's power at the heart of Valther's operation. The station shuddered, and then, with a sound like a dying beast, it began to implode. "Everyone hold on," Sienna yelled, as the pod was flung away from the collapsing station. In the chaos, it was hard to tell up from down, future from past, but they were alive and they'd done it. As they drifted through the void, the wreckage of Valther's empire behind them, they shared a moment of silence. The impossible had been achieved, and the universe would never be the same. "Well, that was something," Dex said, breaking the silence with his usual irreverence. "Something indeed," Rylex agreed. "We might actually have a future now." Sienna looked at her team, a ragtag group of rebels and misfits, and felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. "We did it," she said, a simple statement loaded with meaning. Jax grinned, his face a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "We might have just saved the universe, or at least made it a little less terrible. And we did it with style," Alia added, raising her mug in a salute. As they sailed through the void, the remnants of Valther's once mighty empire scattered behind them. They knew they had changed the course of history. The anomaly, once a threat, was now their ally, a source of power that could create a new world, one free from the chains of corporate tyranny. "Here's to post-scarcity," Sienna said, raising an imaginary glass. "May we never have to deal with shareholders again." "Or Valther," Jax added, chuckling. "Rest in pieces. And let's hope the universe has a sense of humor," Rylex said. "Because we're going to need it." The pod continued its journey, a tiny vessel in an infinite sea, guided by the hope of a better tomorrow. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity. And as the stars stretched endlessly before them, they knew that even in a universe filled with chaos, there was still room for hope, and maybe, just maybe, a happy ending. For now, at least, they were free. The Wormhole crossroad, once a cosmic chaos magnet, now gleamed with the faint promise of hope, or maybe that was just the new safety lights they'd installed. Either way, it was a step up from the interstellar death trap it had been under Valther's regime. Sienna leaned against the observation deck railing, staring out into the expanse. The station hummed with a new energy, the kind that wasn't likely to blow up in their faces, or so the engineers assured her. She had to admit, it was nice to have the odds in their favor for once. Jax sauntered over, his boots making a satisfying thunk on the metal floor. "So, we actually pulled it off." "Didn't see that coming." "Yeah," Sienna replied, still half expecting the universe to yank the rug out from under them. "Feels like we're living in someone else's happy ending. Probably why it feels so weird," Jax said, giving her a lopsided grin. "But hey, at least we don't have to worry about Valther getting his grubby hands on everything." The station wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. With Valther's empire in ruins, the Wormhole crossroad had transformed into a beacon of cooperation and innovation, drawing curious minds and wandering souls from all corners of the galaxy. The once oppressive corridors now buzzed with the chatter of new beginnings, a testament to human tenacity. Not that Sienna would ever use such a cliché. "Rylex is in his nook, tinkering with something," Jax continued. "Probably another one of his gadget of nightmare specials. Wants to improve the wormhole stabilizer, make it idiot-proof. I'll bet it self-destructs if you don't solve a riddle first," Sienna chuckled. "You know how he loves his little challenges." Jax nodded, his face splitting into a grin. "Keeps things interesting." "And Alia's been in the break room, brewing her usual concoction. Swears it's tea, but it smells like paint thinner." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Alia appeared, mug in hand, the liquid inside swirling ominously. "I call it essence of disaster, guaranteed to wake you up or melt your insides. Either way, you're not sleeping." Dex followed, looking more relaxed than Sienna had ever seen him. "I could retire now, but this is too much fun," he said, taking a cautious sniff of Alia's brew before recoiling. Sienna watched her makeshift family with a warmth she hardly recognized. They'd come a long way from being a ragtag band of rebels, their lives a constant juggling act of survival and defiance. Now, they were building something real, something that might just last. And if it didn't, well, at least they'd have a hell of a story. "Anyone heard from Valther?" Sienna asked, not really expecting an answer. The man had vanished into the ether after his empire crumbled, likely licking his wounds in some corporate safe house. "Last I heard, he was trying to start a new company," Dex said, laughing. "Maybe Valther Industries, for when you want everything to fall apart." "Catchy," Alia added. "I'd invest." Despite the jokes, they all knew Valther wasn't finished. Men like him never were. He'd be back with another scheme, but for now he was just an unpleasant memory. Sienna turned back to the view, the stars stretching out like a promise. "We've really done it. We've turned this place into a model for other societies. Who'd have thought?" "Not me," Jax said, leaning on the railing beside her. "But I have to admit, it feels pretty damn good." "Better than blowing up in a fiery mess," Alia agreed, raising her mug in a toast. To not dying horrifically. The room erupted in laughter, the sound echoing through the station that was now theirs. It was a far cry from the tension-filled days of plodding and barely scraping by, and Sienna couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. "We've made this place more than just a way station," she said, her voice steady. "It's a refuge, a starting point for others who want to break free from corporate chains." "Got a bit of a messiah complex going on there, Sienna," Rylex teased, appearing with his mechanical eye whirring softly. "Hardly," she shot back, "just stating the obvious. Though maybe I should start charging for my wisdom. Or we could charge for tours," Jack suggested, grinning. "Welcome to the place that flipped off corporate greed and lived to tell the tale." "Sign me up," Dex said, joining them at the railing. "I'll even do the commentary." And here we have the spot where Sienna nearly lost her marbles trying to keep the anomaly from imploding. Sienna rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a smile. "And over there is where Jax tried to be optimistic and nearly gave us all heart attacks." "Hey, optimism is a valid strategy," Jax protested, crossing his arms. "Just because it doesn't always work doesn't mean it's not hilarious," Alia finished for him, earning a playful shove from Jax. The truth was, they'd all been optimists in their own way. They'd had to be to survive the madness. Now they had the chance to shape something better, a future free from the shadows of corporate overlords and their relentless pursuit of profit at any cost. "So what's next for us?" Dex asked, a question that held both excitement and uncertainty. "Keep the peace," Sienna replied, thinking of the new arrivals, the scientists, engineers, and dreamers who'd come seeking a fresh start. "We've got a lot of work ahead to make this place sustainable. And maybe a little less of a death trap," Rylex added, folding his arms across his chest. "Definitely that," Sienna agreed. "Plus, I hear there's a whole galaxy out there that could use a little less corporate interference." "Sounds like a job for the station of misfits," Jax said, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Our new initiative, Operation Stick It to the Man." "Catchy," Alia said, raising her mug again. "I'd drink to that." The stars outside the observation deck seemed to twinkle with approval, their light reflecting off the station, now a symbol of hope and resistance. For the first time in forever, Sienna felt like they were more than just a ragtag group of rebels. They were builders, creators, and maybe even leaders of a new era. "We're building something that might just outlast us all," Sienna said, her voice soft but resolute. "Wouldn't that be something?" Rylex mused, his gaze distant as if already calculating the next step. As they stood there, united by their shared past and uncertain future, Sienna realized that they'd done more than just survive. They'd thrived, turning their rebellion into a foundation for change. And maybe, just maybe, they'd inspired others in the process. "Here's to the future," she declared, raising her imaginary glass once more. "May it be a lot more interesting and a lot less deadly. And may we always find a way to laugh in the face of danger," Jax added, his grin infectious. As laughter filled the room, Sienna couldn't help but think they'd already won the hardest battle. They'd faced the darkness, and against all odds, they'd found their way through to the light. Now, it was up to them to keep it shining. Together, they turned away from the observation deck, leaving the stars to their own devices. There was work to be done, and while they might not always get it right, they'd face whatever came next with the same irreverence and courage that had seen them through so far. In a universe that thrived on the unpredictable and fed on chaos, they'd carved out their own little corner of sanity. They'd become a story worth telling, a legend in the making. And as Sienna Drake led her crew of misfits into the next chapter, she knew they'd be ready for whatever came next, because they were human after all. Clever, irreverent, and maybe just a little bit insane. But in a universe filled with uncertainties, that was exactly what made them unstoppable.